Welcome back to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. We have a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I'm your host, Ben Wolk. I am here with Jordan Hill, who's coming to us from Wichita, Kansas today. Obviously, a lot going on this week from a college basketball standpoint, but as we know, hot and heavy time of year for recruiting in terms of getting guys on campus, maybe getting a couple of commitments. So a lot to get into from the recruiting side of things, which we will emphasize during this episode. We'll talk a little bit of Jared Curtis, who is just on campus, and what we've heard from that five-star quarterback's visit. What does it mean for quarterback recruiting? Georgia landed a commitment over the weekend from in-state wide receiver Brady Marchese, so I'll talk a little bit about his game, about what getting that commitment means, and even more important than that, Brady Marchese will be here as our special guest interview for the show as well. So we talked to him for about 20 minutes or so about what got him to commit to Georgia as early as he did. As always, arrow pointing up, predict to commit, and maybe some other things that we'll get into along the way as well. Jordan, before I get into the Jared Curtis side of things, what's it like in Wichita, Kansas right now?
Yeah, let's talk about other stuff. Why would people want to talk about a five-star quarterback? No, it's been a fun little adventure out in Wichita. We're recording on Wednesday. I think we decided we're going to put this episode out on Thursday before the basketball game, which I'm a little disappointed, Ben. I wanted to sort of do like the future prediction, like we're talking after the fact and just be like, man, Blue Cane triple-double. I mean, who saw that coming? I mean, like really lean into like we're kind of looking into the crystal ball. But no, it's been a fun time. First time I've been to Wichita. Hoping to go out and see a few sights on Wednesday night before this game on Thursday. But fun time, and I'm sure we'll talk a little Georgia basketball later on in this episode. But super excited to be out here.
Yeah, well, don't worry. I'm going to find plenty of ways to make you do some kind of like time traveling predictions anyways. Even though we're putting this out earlier than I expected to, I'll find a way. Don't worry about that. We got to get in. We got to start talking about five-star quarterback Jared Curtis, formerly committed to Georgia, officially down to two schools in his recruitment, Georgia being one, Oregon being the other. At the beginning of the month, when he narrowed down to those top two, he had his sights set on a 1 week stretch of visits where he was going to be at both Auburn and Georgia. That was last week. And so really, the focus of this episode is talking about Jared Curtis and what does it mean? What happens next? I think that both Oregon and Georgia are at a little bit of a standstill from a recruiting standpoint until they get word from Jared Curtis and what his decision is. So he started out last week. He was at Oregon for 3 to 4 days. He hasn't been out to Eugene, Oregon nearly as many times as he's been to Athens. So it was a really important opportunity for him to get out west, check out Dan Lanning's program. I would say coming into the month, I would probably have considered Oregon the favorite. That's a key reason why he was not in my first mock class 1.0 that I put out at the beginning of the month. They have some financial advantages that Kirby Smart has alluded to through the last year about the treasure troves of Nike that Dan Lanning has to work with. That's always going to play into your favor when you're recruiting one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And so I think that that is a key reason why Oregon is, in one of the teams in the driver's seat and why I was hesitant to put Jared Curtis into Georgia's mock class 1.0. But he takes that second half of the week visit to Georgia, and, some of the things that I start hearing make me start second guessing how I feel about that. I'm not ready to sit here right now and say I think that Georgia is going to get a commitment from Jared Curtis, or that I think Georgia is the front runner to get Jared Curtis. But there's so much familiarity on Georgia's campus, whether that be with Mike Bobo, who he probably has the closest relationship of any coach recruiting him, whether that be Kirby Smart, whether that be just some of these off the field staffers, or, players in the building, like you could tell even just when we were out there at practice and we were around Jared Curtis, like he interacts in a way like someone who feels like he's almost been part of Georgia's football program for multiple years. And the reason he feels that way is because he kind of has been part of Georgia's football program for multiple years. Like he was committed to Georgia for so long. He's been at so many different variations of recruiting events. Like I think that when he's on campus at Georgia, he feels like he's at home, you know, in talking to some people around this recruitment and what I think are going to be the reasons formulating Jared Curtis's decision. Proximity to home is definitely, it matters here. Like getting to Eugene, Oregon and getting to Athens, Georgia are two entirely different things when you're from Nashville, Tennessee. There's a reason why he's been to Georgia as many times as he has, why his family has been to Georgia as many times as he has, and why his family really just doesn't have many experiences out in Eugene, Oregon. I do think that that is something that I have undersold and underappreciated up to this point, and something that I have downplayed Georgia's advantage in that area. Like it is something that definitely matters to the family that they are close to Georgia. And I think that that proximity to home is definitely going to play a role. Now, just clearing the elephant in the room, because you can't talk about any recruitment nowadays without bringing up the NIL side of the conversation. And when you're talking about a 5-star quarterback of his magnitude, like that is going to be, you know, to the fullest degree. Like these are two programs, Oregon and Georgia, that are going to play ball for a guy like Jared Curtis. Now, what I think is interesting is neither of these teams, I don't think, view Jared Curtis as their starter in 2026. Like I think that, you know, Georgia's got Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi on campus. Oregon, they have Dante Moore. Who knows who else that they have behind him that they are feeling confident about as well. But I don't think that either team is approaching this like their 2026 starting quarterback is going to be Jared Curtis. And so one of the conversations that I've had around this is in this new world of revenue share and what your quote unquote salary cap looks like it's risky business to be paying a quarterback $1.5 million in year one to go be your backup quarterback. Now 10% of your roster cap is being allotted to a guy that probably is not making an impact on your football team during that season. And so I think that's changing the way that these teams are having to approach these conversations. And so one thing that I think is a safe bet, Oregon's probably coming in with an offer over Georgia's when it comes to just the pure on paper coming out of the revenue share part of this agreement. And I think that Georgia has acknowledged that they are going to, you know, maybe do even more than they're a little bit comfortable with there. And I don't know the specific figures, but I think they're going to go a little bit more than they're comfortable with there because this is someone that they feel like is worth it. And he's not the only person in this class that they feel that way about. I mean, Jackson Cantwell is an offensive lineman. Mark Bowman is a tight end. Tyler Atkinson is a linebacker. Savion Hyder's a running back. Like, these are all guys that I think are going to demand pretty high value recruitments, and Georgia wants to be involved in all of them. And so they're going to try and find a way to do so. But, you know, in Jared Curtis's case, I don't think Georgia's willing to really move forward with anything until they get an answer there. And that's not just at the quarterback position. Like, that's anywhere. I think you kind of have to know how much are you devoting to your quarterback position before you figure out what that's going to mean for your quote unquote salary cap everywhere else. And so I think that's why Jared Curtis had this March visit that's essentially being approached as an official visit. He does not have a timeline set out for when he is going to make that final decision, but I am told that they'd rather get this over sooner rather than later. They've grown weary of the recruiting process. When I say they, I mean Jared Curtis, I mean his family, I mean his agents, just the entire group team that is being a part of this decision. I think they're ready for this thing to wind down, and that's why you've seen this handled the way that you have this month. Honestly, Jordan, if I were making a mock class right now, and I will probably do one before spring practice is complete. So I don't know if Jared will have a decision by the end of March or not, but I think April 1st, I'll probably have my mock class 2.0. And as we sit here on March 19th, I think that I would have Jared Curtis in there just based on some of the things that I've been hearing. And, Georgia's trying to tackle the NIL conversation head on. I know that they had some important meetings or just some like fun little tidbits from Jared's visit. Like, what did he get into? What did he do? I know that he had a really rigorous film session with Mike Bobo. I'm pretty sure it was pretty early in the morning where they broke down a lot of what they, scheme, how they see Jared fitting in, what they've seen from him from his junior highlight tape, and how that will translate. Like, they got a lot of that in. But I know that Georgia's trying to tackle the NIL conversation head on. And, one thing that I know Georgia prides itself on is helping generate these real name, image, and likeness deals for their most marketable players like Malachi Starks and Brock Bowers and Stetson Bennett and JT Daniels and people through the years that had true name, image, and likeness marketability. Jared Curtis, of course, is someone that falls into that camp. And so I know that they were, Georgia prides itself on really over 50% of the NIL deals that have been generated for Georgia players has been through that style of marketing deal, less so than just money directly from the collective. And I think that makes Georgia unique in that respect. They're not alone. Other schools do a great job of that as well. I'm not saying that Georgia is the only one, but I think Georgia definitely prides itself on its ability to do that. And so I think, letting Jared know, like, hey, if you want to come to a program where you're going to win and you're going to be the guy eventually, and they have a proven production of developing quarterbacks through the years, eventually your marketability being at a program like Georgia is going to, be there beyond, what's being provided via the rev share agreement. Now, Oregon is definitely in that consideration as well. So there's a reason why both of those types of schools are the ones that he's deciding between. But yeah, I know nobody's sitting here actually, people listening to this are probably asking me for a prediction right now. But I think I favor Georgia, but it really is a coin flip. I think anybody saying that they have an answer one way or the other is guessing. And this is March 19th. Could it be different on March 20th or March 21st? Sure. But on March 19th, I really think that anybody is guessing in terms of which direction they think that he's going. But the more that I have conversations about how receptive they are to some of the NIL conversations that they've had with Georgia, as well as the proximity to home and how much Georgia is prioritizing him. Yeah, I think I like where Georgia's at right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be one to follow the next week or 2 weeks, however long it goes. And, it's one of those things when we talk about it, I think we try to tread carefully because it seems like Georgia has been in these conversations. Going back to Arch Manning, I think Georgia liked where they were with Arch Manning, and Arch picks Texas. And then you have the Dylan Raiola situation where, he's coming to Georgia. He moves to Georgia and goes to high school for his senior year. And then, we're going to Nebraska instead. So I sort of understand the hesitation, and I sort of understand, we talk to people on the board of being like, okay, we hear what y'all are saying, but let's just wait and see what happens. And, we'll follow this one and continue to report on it. But Ben, I wanted to get your thought on this. And this is not Jared Curtis specific. This is more of, you are a team and you are one of two finalists for a player. Would you rather host that player first, or would you rather host them second? And I ask you this, and I want you to give your thoughts, but I like where Georgia fell in this, where Georgia goes second. Oregon had a chance to pitch whatever to Jared and lay out what they expect, but Georgia had a chance to counter, and I'm not necessarily talking about financially, but to answer any questions that Jared and his family had out of that Oregon visit, maybe things they saw in that visit that, what would this look like at Georgia? For me, I would rather be that second team, but I wanted to see what you thought.
I can see it either way. I think that being second definitely gives you the ability, like, he went to Oregon, and make no mistake about it, like, yes, this is a visit. You want him to have a good time. You want him to be able to relax and feel at home. There's also like real business conversations that need to be had during the course of these visits. Like I've said before, like these are being approached like this was being approached like an official visit. And so the NIL talk, what where do you fit into the depth chart and what does your future look like? Like all of the important asks from both sides were having to happen on these visits. And, Oregon has their visit. And when he gets to Georgia might know some of the answers of what happened on Oregon, or they might be able to get some of the answers of what happened to Oregon, but they at least have the luxury of knowing everything that unfolded at Oregon and how they can kind of counteract that. Whereas in Oregon's case, I'm sure when he left his visit to Athens, they needed to hop on the phone call with Dan Lanning again, because Dan Lanning probably wanted to know, hey, what did you hear from Georgia about this, X, Y, and Z? Like, what do we still need to answer now that you know what you know about Georgia? So I can see it going either way. I mean, if we're, in the NIL space, if you're the first team and you give the first, real NIL offer and you set the bar, and every other school that you go to after that comes in underneath from an NIL offer standpoint, and they don't know that, you kind of have the advantage being the first school because everyone just kind of is underwhelmed. Now, again, that's if NIL price is the only driving factor in your recruitment, or if that is going to be the determining factor. And I think that even though Georgia and Oregon are not schools that are going to be penny pinching when it comes to this type of thing, I think both of them operate very efficiently and intelligently when it comes to how they manage their caps. And so they handle this like smart NFL GMs are going to handle it. And they're not going to be irresponsible with how they divvy up their money. And so I think that in both cases, they're probably being pretty wise with how they structure these contracts, because to my point earlier, how much are you really trying to spend on a year one guy that might be your second or third string quarterback the first year on campus? Like, you cannot be handcuffing your salary cap that much on guys that aren't going to be having impacts on that roster. And it's probably the most fascinating part about what the future of college football looks like, because the way that you structure your roster and put it together now is not the same as it used to be. It's not just, do we like this player? It's, do we like this player, and at what value do we like this player? Like, I'm not going to call out any specific names, but I've had conversations with Georgia and elsewhere, but about players that are at the very top of Georgia's board, some of the best players in the country that are at the very top of Georgia's board that obviously Georgia wants. And in past years, before NIL years, Georgia would sign them 10 times out of 10. But because we live in a new world, that's not always going to be the case. And at a certain point, Georgia has to say, all right, is this a guy that's going to be playing year one? If not, you might have to bow out, because, and at some positions, like on, offensive line or defensive line where you're rotating a bunch, they might not be a year one guy at Georgia, but they might be a year one guy at Texas or Oregon or Florida State or Miami or whoever it is that's recruiting them. And as a result, that program might have very explainable reasons why they would value them higher and why you would be able to make more in year one at that school. And there are probably examples the same at Georgia, right? Where, and I don't know the details of all of it, but like in KJ Bolden's case, like Georgia really needed KJ Bolden as a freshman. I mean, granted, Florida State really needed KJ Bolden as a freshman too. And we don't need to, add any insult to injury there for Florida State, but Georgia might have valued a safety in that spot in year one more than some other schools who had senior veteran-laden safeties, and they didn't need someone in year one the way that they did. And so again, it just changes the way that we have to talk about roster building now, because it's not as simple as this is the number one player on Georgia's board, and so if Georgia misses on him, it's a failure. It's like there are number one players on Georgia's board at certain positions that Georgia is saying, given the value that we hold them at and their position group and where they fit into our depth chart, we're not going to be able to get into a bidding war for that player, even though we think very, very highly of what they bring as a talent.
It kind of goes back to something I've said quite a few times, specifically in this NIL era of college football and really college athletics, of just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's understanding, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the financial implications of being able to add this guy really worth it to our team? And I think that's something that Georgia really considers when they're going after even guys they really, really want. They are going to look at the bigger picture, and they're not going to make an unwise financial decision just because they really like a recruit.
Now, you brought up Arch Manning, obviously from the 2023 class. Georgia misses on him. They don't end up taking a quarterback in the 2023 cycle. You brought up Dylan Raiola. He flips to Nebraska last minute. I mean, Ryan Puglisi is the godsend to Georgia's quarterback recruiting, because if he had not been as faithful as he was throughout the course of it, and he was given every reason to not be as loyal as he was, I mean, Georgia would be in a real tight spot at quarterback with, obviously they just take two, but Ryan Montgomery's coming off an ACL injury. Hezekiah Millender, is someone that we'll see 2-3 years down the line what he has become. I think there's a lot of promise about, just his skill set and what he's going to be able to bring in the future once he's had a chance to develop. But Georgia cannot afford to not take a quarterback this class. So I think that they've learned some lessons from Arch Manning and from Dylan Raiola that have changed the way that they are approaching recruiting quarterback. They are all in on Jared Curtis. So, it depends how you when I say you're all in on Jared Curtis, Jordan, what does that mean to you?
To me, that means that you'll do whatever you can to get him. But I mean, I don't know if you're not comfortable describing it that way, but if you tell me you're all in, it's whatever we got to do to get him, we're going to do.
Well, it occurred to me that I was about to describe it that way, and that other people might hear that differently. So Georgia is all in on Jared Curtis in the sense that no other quarterback is going to have a green light to commit to Georgia until Georgia knows for sure that Jared Curtis is committing to Oregon. So until that point, it is Jared Curtis's decision. Now, does that change if Jared Curtis waits until June? Maybe. I don't expect Jared Curtis to wait until June, so I don't think that's something that we're going to have a conversation about, but we might have to have that conversation when we get there. But I bring that up to say Jared Curtis, that Georgia's all in on Jared Curtis's decision. Now, they also understand there is a very realistic possibility that Jared Curtis commits to Oregon, and that could happen for all we know as soon as tomorrow. Like, he's taking that visit. I know that they are decompressing. They wanted to get away from those trips, have some conversations as a family with the agent to figure everything out. I don't think that there is any time that's too soon where Jared Curtis could potentially be making that decision. If Jared Curtis commits to Oregon, Georgia will immediately pivot. And so I wanted to take a second to kind of just call out who are the quarterbacks that we should know about in that respect. I'll start with Jaden O'Neal, and I'll start with him just because he's the only other quarterback in the 2026 class other than Jared Curtis that has visited Georgia so far during spring practice. He's committed to Oklahoma right now. I got the chance to actually see him out in San Antonio at the Navy All-American Combine earlier this year, so I have some visibility into him. He actually just moved across the country from California to somewhere just outside of Norman, Oklahoma. So interesting. Like you mentioned, Dylan Raiola moves all the way across the country to go to Buford, ends up going to Nebraska. There's some weird family ties there that allowed that to be more possible. I think I understand that there's a lot of buzz with Georgia and Jaden O'Neal right now because he took a multiple day visit. And I think that there is a lot of mutual respect there between how Georgia feels about Jaden O'Neal as a prospect and also what Jaden O'Neal thinks about Georgia. I'm going to need to see a little bit more unfold there before I believe that a guy that just moved to Oklahoma is not going to stick with his commitment to Oklahoma. Now, the reason why people feel that there's a chance that Jaden O'Neal might flip away from Oklahoma is because Oklahoma has been steadily recruiting more and more a guy from Texas, Bo Bentley. And Bo Bentley's a name that I've mentioned because I got to see him out at the Navy All-American Bowl in San Antonio as well. I think the world of Bo Bentley. In fact, nobody cares about my opinion. I know that. But if Georgia were to miss on Jared Curtis, Bo Bentley would be my choice in terms of who I would go after and who I would want to sign and who I think would be the best option for Georgia. My understanding is, and I am actually sort of first reporting this on here, not on Dogs 24/7, but I want to get more answers before I actually write it down. Sometimes I'll fire off at the hip on these podcasts every now and again, but I am expecting Bo Bentley to be on a visit to Georgia sometime in the next few days, potentially for the Saturday practice. That's big because he set a spring practice visit schedule at the beginning of the month, and Georgia was not included on that when he did not have an offer. He picks up the offer from Georgia, and now I am expecting him to come on a visit. This is one where I know Oklahoma has a lot of momentum, and that's why some of the Jaden O'Neal potentially flipping away from their conversation has started, and I get it. I know LSU has done a really great job with Bo Bentley as well, but this is someone that I think Georgia has been communicating with more than people realize, and that there is I don't want to say that the Bentley family wants to be at Georgia because that's probably a little bit aggressive of a take. They haven't even actually visited yet, but I think that their understanding of what Georgia is as a football program has some meaning to them, and that when he gets on this visit to Georgia, it's something that I am watching closely. Now, where this becomes tricky is when you aren't really willing to take a commitment from anyone until Jared Curtis has given you word on what he's going to do. You got to be delicate with how you approach that situation. And so that visit with Bo Bentley is one that I am watching very, very closely, just because it's who I would pivot to as the number 2 quarterback. And I'm interested to see if Georgia would feel the same way. Now, that might not be Georgia's call. If Bo Bentley commits to Oklahoma or commits to LSU, that changes things a little bit, especially if it's LSU. If he commits to Oklahoma, that's where I think the Jaden O'Neal stuff, there becomes a little bit more legitimacy to it, because he just might not feel like he has that spot as the guy at quarterback in Oklahoma's class. A couple other names. The guy that I had in my mock class 2.0 actually as Georgia's quarterback was Landon Duckworth. I would potentially still consider that at this point in time. I think just because of everything that I've said about maybe me leaning Jared Curtis, I think I might have Jared Curtis as my mock class 2.0 choice. And then where it becomes interesting is I think Bo Bentley will have finished his visit before I'm doing another mock class. And so I think I'm going to have a little bit better understanding of where he fits in all of this. But Landon Duckworth and Dia Bell are 2 quarterbacks that Georgia really likes. I think that they have a chance to potentially get a little bit too competitive for Georgia's liking, just because I could see Auburn making a run and going all in on Landon Duckworth. I think Ole Miss values him really highly as well. Dia Bell is committed to Texas right now, and being from South Florida, it wouldn't shock me at all if any of the Florida schools end up making a run at him as well. So that one could get a little expensive for Georgia's liking. But again, they already are, in it for Jared Curtis, who you got to, go all in for a guy like Jared Curtis. And so, that how that frees up salary cap conversation and things like that. If he goes to Oregon, we'll see. The one name that is interesting to me that I could see becoming more of a factor is Jonas Williams. He just flipped from Oregon to USC. Georgia has some relationships there. Like he played for the same 7-on-7 team as Talon Taylor. Georgia obviously did a great job in that recruitment. I think Georgia is behind for Jonas Williams. Obviously, he's committed. He's been committed to 2 other places other than Georgia up to this point. But that's just one that I've put in my back pocket as I'm not really following Jonas Williams' recruitment right now. But if Georgia misses on Jared Curtis and that happens later and Bo Bentley goes somewhere else and Jaden O'Neal's flip to Georgia isn't as much of a sure thing, and Landon Duckworth and Dia Bell do get a little bit more on the pricey side of things, or Auburn and Ole Miss just, really prioritize him more than Georgia does, Jonas Williams is a name that I'm keeping in my back pocket as someone I could see Georgia circling back around on later on in the cycle.
My thing there, Ben, I just can't think of a time that Georgia's flipped a USC commit. Just nobody comes to mind there. Just don't ever see that one.
Yeah, no, right. All right. Was there anything that you feel like we needed to cover from a quarterback recruiting standpoint that we didn't there?
No, I think you hit on the biggest thing, and it's just a very difficult spot for Georgia. But every team, especially the big-time teams going after these top-ranked quarterbacks, they wind up having to walk a fine line because, more often than not, your quarterback is sort of that Pied Piper for your class, and you want to get that guy early one, to not have to worry about quarterback, but two, that can help with receiver recruiting. That can help with people he's close to, whether it's, on the high school circuit or 7-on-7 or whatever. So, Georgia has no choice but to be patient here. And, it could really work out if they wind up getting their guy in Jared Curtis. And they may wind up having to be creative if they wait it out and Jared picks Oregon instead.
All right. Big commitment from Georgia over the weekend. I don't want to say out of the blue just because, there's been some momentum in this recruitment. And just for those that are, unaware of the news, Cartersville wide receiver Brady Marchese, and I do want to call out Brady Marchese. I get real Italian with it. I have him, we're about to have him in an interview as well later in the show. I have him do the pronunciation guide as well. I always want to use this show as a pronunciation guide because I've heard Brady Marchese, I've heard Brady Marchese. Just wanted to get that right. So get super Italian whenever you start saying Brady Marchese's name. I think his dad's from the Bronx, maybe somewhere in New York. So he's sort of got that edge to him as well. But I wanted to before we get into the interview with Brady, and he will talk plenty about why he chose Georgia and when he kind of knew it was Georgia and some things that he knows about it along the way as well. But I wanted to call something out from a couple of months ago. And I'm trying to find this. I should have pulled this up before the show, but this was back on January 16th. I got a text message from someone in the state of Georgia that I very much respect their opinions on everything as it relates to talent in the state of Georgia. And it was out of the blue. So anytime you get an out of the blue text as well, it always makes you be like, all right, what's going on here? Question was, between you and me, which I'm already undoing between you and me, but I won't get into all the details of our conversation beyond that. Who's better, Landon Roldan or Brady Marchese? And I'm going to be just totally blunt with you. I didn't know hardly anything about Brady Marchese. This is January 16th. I didn't know hardly anything about it. I said, let me go do some film work and have some other conversations on my end, and let me get back to you about this. And so I go watch Brady Marchese's film, and he's an electric factory. I realized right away the reason this person is asking me this question is not really like let's turn this into a competition between Landon Roldan and Brady Marchese, but acknowledging like they know how I feel about Landon Roldan and what he is as a prospect, and almost wanting to equate the two of them and say like, hey, Brady Marchese currently is an unranked prospect with 0 stars in the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings. This time last year, Landon Roldan was in almost the exact same boat, and look what he ended up getting elevated to as a prospect. So I go watch the film. It speaks for itself. He is a very physically well-built prospect. He runs like the wind. I think he's posted 22 plus on the GPS multiple times. You watch his highlight film, which I get into with him in the interview, and he is a touchdown waiting to happen. I don't know that I've watched film of anyone in the last year that had as many 85-plus yard touchdowns as he did. I think he had 290-plus yarders in the first minute and a half of his clips or something like that. And it's just rare type of stuff that he's doing. And it's not just like I'm running by guys and hitting them deep shots. Like, he's doing a lot of short intermediate things and turning it in to 70, 80, 90 yards. And so really impressive in terms of, what he's able to do as that type of player. But, I end up, doing my research on that. I get back to the person who had brought that up to me. And wouldn't you know it, within a week after that conversation, Kirby Smart is up at Cartersville High School. James Coley's up at Cartersville High School, and Brady Marchese's getting his offer from Georgia. I think it was like 3 or 4 days after that he ends up going on that February 1st junior day to Georgia. And really, the Georgia Brady Marchese story has been history from there. Now, what I find fascinating about this is I was having a conversation just a couple of weeks ago about the wide receiver room in general. And I put out I'm doing my names to know who you should know at each position group. And we just wrapped up the offense, as we're recording this, we just wrapped up the offense today with the interior offensive line, but had the wide receiver sometime at the end of last week, and Brady Marchese's name was included there as one of the top names to know. And that's not me saying, oh, it's up there. Of course, like I'm just doing my job. If he wasn't on the list and then he's committing 3 days later, like, what are we doing here? That said, when I was having conversations around that, one thing that got brought up to me was how much Georgia loved Brady Marchese. It was like they feel that he is one of the best wide receiver prospects in the state. They were a little bit concerned that, and the way it got described to me is like, is Brady Marchese too good? And what I mean by that is like, he is someone that, again, when you're talking about salary cap and value and having to get your entire roster put together at the right price, like, you try and find these guys in the state of Georgia that you're like, man, I think that this player is awesome, but I don't necessarily think it's going to, cost us an arm and a leg the way that it would. I mean, 5-star wide receiver Tristan Keys just commits to LSU today. Like, that is a high priced recruitment. And so I think Georgia was having the conversation like, man, we love Brady Marchese. We think that he sort of fits what could be, a more favorably priced recruit. But I think there was some concern, like, is he too good? Is this someone that an Alabama or an Auburn or a Tennessee or a Florida State is just going to come in on and, throw something major at him, and Georgia's just not going to be able to hang with that because they need to take another 4 to 5 wide receiver class. And so I think that because of the way that they were thinking about that, Georgia really wanted to prioritize this recruitment sooner rather than later. And you'll hear this in the interview with him, but he had some conversations with James Coley over the last 2 weeks and some conversations with Kirby Smart over the last week or so that I think made him really start thinking like, hey, if I want to do this, like, now is the right time. And I really need to consider jumping on board with Georgia sooner rather than later. And so he shares a lot of details about that in our interview. But I think that this was one where Georgia really wanted to try and lock this in as quickly as it could.
All right, Ben, stop being modest. It was Kirby who texted you, wasn't it? He was asking, should we go get this guy? Is he like a Landon? Just lay it all out there. You don't got to play so coy.
Yeah. No, I would the amount of credibility. I can only imagine how many more thousand listeners and watchers we would get in this show. If that was the case, no, but believe it or not, there are other people other than Kirby Smart in the state of Georgia who I do think very highly of what they know about the talent within the state. But I'm sure this person probably has Kirby Smart on speed dial. So it probably, I wouldn't be surprised if I was just one of the many that they were having this conversation with. And, one thing that I do know, and I get it, I've talked with Brady about this in the past, and he gets into this in the interview too. We talked about it very briefly, but I always find it fascinating how coaching staffs go through doing their homework to figure out as much as they can about these things. And, Georgia is super sticklers about getting verified measurables and times. So they want to know what is your arm length, what is your height, what is your weight, what is your hand size, how fast do you run the 40 or the 100? Like, Georgia really cares deeply about getting verified times. That's why it's so important to them to get guys on campus for camps or for these visits so they can actually measure them in themselves and they can really verify those types of things. And, you watch Brady Marchese's film, he lights it up. He's freakishly fast. They didn't know exactly what he was running. And, what I've come to learn is they have some relationships across the country. And Brady went to a camp at Coastal Carolina, verified a 4.40. Georgia confirms that with Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina probably reached a point where they said, oh, hell, this kid's not coming to Coastal Carolina. We can share that info with Georgia. No harm, no foul to us. And once Georgia got that verified from a staff that they respect, I think that was really what made them jump in and offer Brady. And now he's running track. He told me he's going to be trying to hit 10.7, 10.8. I don't want to give away too much of the interview here, beforehand, but 10.7, 10.8 in the 100 meters, which, that's scooting. And that's someone that I think that Georgia, will feel really, really good about. What does this mean for the rest of wide receiver recruiting? I don't think it changes a whole lot. I think that Georgia's going to take a few guys from the state of Georgia, Brady Marchese being one. Ryan Mosley's the guy that I've picked in a predict to commit segment previously. I think there's some other guys in the state of Georgia, Jaden Dunbar, Kayvon Cunciaro, that they are still evaluating and they're going to want to get to this spring. I'm interested to see how elite of the elite Georgia feels like it's able to shoot for at receiver. It's going to be tough with the class that they just brought in and the transfers that they just brought in. I don't think it's going to be the easiest in the world for Georgia to go and get a Tristan Keys or a Sedarian Morgan, who are two of the, more. I would assume those two guys are probably the number one and number two guys on just about everybody's wide receiver board. I think it's going to be a challenge for Georgia to go strike big for that. But maybe Calvin Russell, he's been on campus. Does he schedule an official visit? We'll see there. All right. We do have an awesome interview with Brady. He sat with us for about 20 minutes. Before we get into that interview, I do, as always, want to call out, please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. I think we've got a great relationship with Brady, and a big reason for that is I'm able to get around the state of Georgia and go see all of these recruits early on in their recruitments, throughout their recruitments. It's allowed me to build relationships with them, to cover their recruitments as they're making decisions, but also to be able to get them on a show like this as well. So please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We are going to have a March Madness special going. I believe it's 50% off annual. Correct me there, Jordan. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you got it. 50% off.
So for March Madness, which you'll obviously get great coverage from Jordan up in Wichita. I think that he covers the basketball team better than anybody else that we've got on the Georgia beat, but also, looking ahead to recruiting times as well. We want, all the people there to follow along throughout the summer as well.
I just want to say too, I appreciate that, Ben, but sincerely, I don't think anyone covers recruiting on this beat better than Ben. I feel good about the job I do covering the football team and basketball, all that. I sincerely think a Dogs 24/7 subscription is worth it on its own for Ben's coverage.
All right. That's enough, Jordan. That's already too much. The show being called the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show is already too much for me. The last thing I need is more, compliments on top of that. Also, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Really appreciate the audiences on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, much larger than I actually anticipated before we dug into the numbers. So appreciate everybody that listens there. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will have an interview with Brady Marchese. Welcome into the show, a very, very special guest. He's the newest member of Georgia's 2026 recruiting class. For those watching on YouTube, he's rocking the Power G on video right now. One of the most dynamic wide receivers in the state of Georgia, really in the country for that matter. From Cartersville, Georgia, the man of the hour, it's Brady Marchese. How are you, Brady?
I'm good. How are you?
For starters, congratulations. Second off, thanks for joining the show. Before we get into a commitment and all that stuff, and we will, I want to start more importantly, because I might have butchered that there. I like this show to be a pronunciation guide for people when they struggle. How did I do on the last name?
It was pretty solid. You said it right. Yes, sir.
Here, you give one for the people just so that they get it straight from the source.
Brady Marchese.
Marchese. So that, you sort of that Italian flair that Georgia's probably lacking on its roster right now. You kind of throw the fingers up like you got a bowl of spaghetti, give a nice hearty Marchese.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to get into the news of the weekend from the top, just because it probably caught some people off guard. I mean, I know that this is relatively new, your interest level in Georgia, or Georgia recruiting you. And so I want to get into all of that for the people. But you take that visit on Saturday for spring practice. Did you know when you woke up that you were going to be driving over there and committing to Georgia?
A little bit. It was a thought in mind for sure. I mean, I was looking forward to like seeing some things, but I mean, everything I had on my checklist, they checked everything off. I mean, if everything felt right about it for sure.
At what point in the day did you really realize, like, all right, Saturday is the day that I'm going to do this?
I would say, really like midway through practice. That's when I like something like it just hit me. I mean, it just everything felt right to me for sure.
I know everyone has a commitment story. Like some guys, it happens on a whim. Some they go through a very detailed process of how they get there. You're obviously at this practice out there on Saturday. Tell us the story. Like, how did you let coaches know? Who did you let know? And what was the reaction that you got from them when you told them the news that you wanted to commit?
So I told one of the assistant receiver coaches kind of like midway through practice, and then when we were in the special teams meeting, we were getting ready to go to the offensive meeting. I told Kirby, I said, I might have some solid news today, and he said, I'm ready to hear it. So I kind of gave like a little hint of something just because like I didn't know if I was like for sure going to do anything just yet. And then in the practice, me, my mom, dad, and my sister went up to Kirby's office, and we talked for a little bit, and he said, how are we going to get you to be a dog? And I said, I'm all in. And then it kind of went the same way with Coach Coley as well.
So did you tell them separately? Did you tell them at the same time?
I told them separately.
Okay. So who'd you tell first, Coach Smart or Coach Coley?
I talked to Coach Kirby first. So I told him first. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So what was Kirby Smart's reaction when you said, I want to be a dog?
As soon as I told him, we got up and hugged each other, and then kind of just leading on with our conversation after that. It was crazy for sure.
So knowing that you'd already told Kirby, how did it go with Coley after the fact?
It kind of went the same way it went with Coach Kirby. Yes, sir.
So I know it sounds kind of like a stupid question, and we've talked up to this point about what intrigues you about Georgia, but what ultimately was it while you're sitting there at that practice? What ultimately was it about Georgia that made you feel so convicted in being ready to commit to them?
I would say just the fact of it, like it feeling like home to me. I mean, obviously, like I didn't grow up like it's obviously a dream come true to me, but I didn't grow up like the biggest like Georgia fan. Like I was never really a fan of like I just loved college football, but obviously Georgia, I mean, they win ball games, and that's something that's always been something cool with me. And just I feel like they get after it like no one else does, and how they do things is just way different for sure. And that's what hit me.
Was that your first time ever being at a Georgia practice?
It was, yes, sir.
So, I mean, people that haven't been at practices, they hear legends of what Georgia practices are like, and then you actually get to see it firsthand. What did you think just being in that environment on Saturday?
I mean, just being able to experience it was just something else for sure. It meant a lot.
So I guess you'd never heard Kirby Smart on the microphone before either. Was that your first experience?
I have not, and that's another thing I loved about their practice. I mean, he's not just sitting back and not getting on to people. Like he's on you the whole time. If you mess up, he's got eyes in the back of his head for sure. So he knows what's going on at all times.
Yeah, I could listen to Kirby Smart on the microphone at practice all day. It's probably the number one reason I'm most disappointed that we don't get as the media get as much time as I would like out there at practice, just because I'd love to hear some of the wild things that he says. Was there anything in particular that had you laughing during practice? Like, man, how did Coach Smart even realize that was going on?
I'd just say when they were watching like punts, Zachariah Branch obviously is new to Georgia, and he was like saying that you're the leader of this group, and every time either one of y'all drops a punt, that's a like suicide or something y'all gonna run. So that was pretty funny. Yes, sir.
So, I know one of the big things when you're out of those practices is like they have you, I mean, I know you're seeing the entire practice, but they want you gravitating towards your position group. So I'm sure that you spend a lot of time around those wide receivers. I'm sure you're as aware at getting recruited by Georgia as much as anyone, how excited Georgia fans are about the young wide receivers that are on campus, the new transfers that are on campus. You got to see it up close. What did you see from that wide receiver group on Saturday?
I saw everything I needed to see. Obviously, they got the best of the best out there. That's what Georgia does. Coach, I was sitting with Coach Harris, and I followed him and Coach Coley around the whole practice. So that was really fun to just see how they do everything and the drills that they go through and stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, it was everything. They showed me everything I needed to see for sure.
Were there any particular players that you were curious, just as a fan of football, that you were curious to watch and see at practice?
I'd say Zachariah Branch for sure. I mean, I was excited to watch him out there, and he was lighting it up the whole time.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of fascinating because, I mean, you getting to sit there and watch a whole practice of him. Not a lot of Georgia folks have gotten to see Zachariah Branch play because he's new. Like, what do you think what type of receiver is he bringing to Georgia?
I'd say like a little, like almost like a Tyreek Hill. I mean, I wouldn't say he's undersized, but I mean, he's got speed. He's aggressive. He goes up and catches everything. I mean, he checks off everything for sure.
For sure. I know this is a conversation that we had really back at the end of January once you picked up that offer from Georgia, but for the folks at home, I want to take them back because, you know, at the beginning of January, you didn't have an offer from Georgia. By the end of January, you did. And now before March is over, you're committed. Has it fully set into you yet? How quick all of that happened and unfolded for you?
I'd say, yeah, most of it has set in. I mean, I'm still kind of taking it in, just like accepting the fact that I'm committed to the Dogs for sure. But I'd say majority of it has set in, yes, sir.
So going back to January, like I know at the end of January, Coach Coley has that visit where he's coming up to see you. You didn't have the offer yet. Like for people that haven't heard the story, like take us back to January, how the offer actually came about and how you started to realize Georgia had real genuine interest in you.
I'd say just obviously them offering me in January was crazy for sure. And then just the fact of them like simply texting me, like it was like almost an everyday thing. And if they weren't texting me every single day, it was every other day. And then just the consistent like love and calls that they showed me. And then the thing that really pushed me to do it was they texted me. I think Coach Coley and a few other Georgia people texted me and that like a few days before I was going up to their spring practice and said, "How are we going to get you to be a Dog?" And obviously, that made me think for sure. And I went home and talked it up with my parents about it, and it was a big topic for the rest of that week for sure.
I mean, it sounds like that's a question Coach Coley asked you about, Coach Smart asked you about in his office. Like when you were thinking through that, like you're hearing these coaches say, "How are we going to get you to be a Dog?" I guess sort of two-parted question. Like one, what did they need to do or what validation did you need to confirm that? And then two, like what did it mean to you to hear how much they really wanted to enforce how much they wanted you and how much they wanted you to say that you wanted to be a Dog?
I would say, I mean, them just watching and showing watching practice and them showing me the facilities and telling me how everything's going to go while I'm going to be up there for the next 4 years. That really that showed me all I needed to see. And then it meant a lot for sure. Just hearing that from Georgia is better than hearing it from anywhere else, I think. So.
Now, I know one of the things we talked about way back then as well was like I think one of the things Georgia wanted answered was verified speeds on you. Like they knew you were fast. It showed up on tape, but they just wanted that confirmation. Do I remember correctly that you ran a 4.4 at Coastal Carolina and that was how Georgia kind of got verified word on things?
Yes, sir. That's exactly how it happened.
All right. So now, I mean, I know you're running track this year. What kind of times are we trying to put up this season?
This season, I'm going to try to get down to the 10.8, 10.7s for sure. I mean, I think my track speed is different from my football speed when I put some pads on, but obviously I want to get down to some low 10s for sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know it's pretty obvious when you watch the film, and we'll get into that here in a second too, like just absolute wheels. But I know one thing Georgia's director of scouting, James Ellis, has put out on social media in the past, like encouraging people to run track, is like fast people run fast. And I think that you're a great example of that. Like the film speaks for itself. Once you see those track times and it's like there's verified proof, I mean, your recruitment blew up. Did you sort of feel that like once everyone realized like, oh man, Brady's like fast, that your recruitment changed?
It did for sure. I think so. I think that's easily one of the biggest parts of my game for sure. And I mean, also just the side part of me being aggressive on perimeter blocking as well.
So I know this past weekend was big for confirming that you wanted to commit to Georgia, but I know, Kirby Smart came by the school in January. I know that you took that junior day visit at, I guess it was February 1st. What happened there at the end of January, beginning of February? Like, what did you learn about Georgia during that stretch that I guess got them in the driver's seat in your recruitment?
I learned that, I mean, we had a few conversations over the phone, and then a few we texted. I texted to Coach Harris a lot, which is that he's like kind of the new assistant receiver coach there, something like that. So me and him talked a lot. I got to talk it up with Coley a few times. Just the fact of like that Georgia, like everything about it. I mean, they're all about winning games, and the way they do things is just, in my mind, way different than the way other people or in schools do things also.
For sure. All right, I want to talk a little bit of ball because I was watching your huddle film. I love watching your huddle film, but I turned it on before we got on here today, so I want to talk about that a little bit as well. But I got to – I guess it's a controversial question. I don't know, but let's just call it like it is. I mean, Georgia's done well with white receivers here recently. I know Ladd McConkey, Landon Roldan, Vance Spafford. Let's just address the elephant in the room. I don't even have a question, but is that something that you've acknowledged?
1,000,000%. I mean, obviously, I played against Landon Roldan. He's a ball player for sure. And then Vance, I haven't really yet seen him play, but I've heard some pretty solid things about him. And then I grew up watching some Ladd McConkey, so I know all about him.
I got to say that does make me feel on the older side of things when I hear you say you grew up watching Ladd McConkey, but that's okay. I won't take that one too personally. But on a serious note, I know a lot of times too, on the wide receiver conversation, everyone tries to pigeonhole you and say like, oh, you're like Ladd or you're like this guy. And I know that you all have different varieties to your game. And so I'll start with my assessment. We already talked about it. Fast as hell, can run, through the room. But I know that there's more to your game than just that. I mean, just going through, and I encourage everyone that's watching this or listening to this, go watch his senior year film, 13 games. I think it's about 7 minutes long, more than worth your 7 minutes to go watch that, or junior year film, rather, I apologize. But just calling out a couple of things from the very beginning. First play, screen, 65 yards to the house untouched. Second one, quick slant, which I'm going to ask a question about that in a second, but quick slant, I think you went 90 untouched, which I was literally laughing out loud while I was watching that clip. I think you have a go route, little underthrown, 70 yards untouched. We mentioned you playing North Oconee and Landon Roldan. I think you had 3 touchdowns in that game, but I know, one's a 90-yarder, another one that's untouched. Again, 3 touchdowns in that game. Contested catch in the back pylon. Like, there's nothing that you really can't do as a wide receiver. I think my favorite, 2 minutes and 40 seconds in, I think a screen pass to your running back, you just run through the defensive back's face mask right on the goal line. I'm sure that that's a part of your game that you really like as well. But I've taken my turn. Describe your game. What do you bring into Georgia's class as a receiver?
I'm obviously going to do whatever I can with whatever they want me to do there for sure. I mean, but I'd say obviously I'm going to work my ass off every day. I know that for a fact for sure. But also I'd say working hard in everything I do, and I think my skill set will do a lot of things at Georgia. I think my perimeter blocking is obviously one of my biggest things for sure, and then I'd say just catching the ball, anything thrown at me, I'm going to catch it, and then just going long for sure. I mean, they can sling all the way down the field, and I'm going to go get under it and score for sure.
So that's what I wanted to ask. I know I ask receivers this a lot. Like, if you can only pick one more route to run, or it's going to be your last route you ever run, what route are you running?
I'd say, obviously either a go ball or a glance for sure. Those are my 2 favorite routes. Okay,
because I was going to ask about this. Like, you have a couple of these, and I don't even know. I don't know y'all's offense well enough to say specifically what you're doing in every situation. But you're like the 7 to 8 yard slant where you kind of just one cut the DB. Like, I feel like you leave them in the dust every time. I feel like both of your 90-yarders that I saw you have, you just leave a corner in the dust with one cut step. Like, I feel like you might be able to just take advantage of guys in one-on-one situations on that route.
I think so too, for sure. Well, actually, I know so that it's we use that a few times. I mean, sometimes we ran that obviously against Calhoun, and then there were a few other times we ran it. It worked out pretty much every time.
And just given the stat plug on last season for you as well. This is according to Max Prep, so if there's an updated version somewhere else or better than me, feel free to correct me. But I've got you at 44 catches, 1,051 yards, 11 touchdowns. That's 23.9 yards per catch. I know it's probably the game you want to talk about the least because it's the one you lost at the end of the year. It's the only game that y'all lost at the end of the year. But you finished the year playing against the undefeated state champs, North Oconee. Great game. In fact, I don't even know where I was that Friday, but I wasn't doing a good enough job because I wasn't there and I should have been there.
It was Georgia was playing Georgia Tech that night.
Okay. All right. So I guess I have an excuse. So thank you for giving me that out. But obviously you're not necessarily matched up per se with Landon Roldan, but 2 guys that are now, one's enrolled at Georgia, one's committed to Georgia. You go off in that game, 7 catches, 180 yards, 3 touchdowns. What do you remember from that performance?
I mean, that was a wild game. Probably one of the craziest games. I mean, I wouldn't say it was one of the best games I played in, but definitely one of the craziest for sure. I mean, we started off a little slow. I mean, we couldn't really get nothing rolling. And then I'd say like around third quarter, then I had a touchdown, broke loose on one. And then things started getting rolled from there. Our defense, we couldn't really we got a stop here and there. But we missed a field goal and tried to go for a 2-point later in the game, and we didn't get that. So we lost by 2. It was a crazy game.
I didn't want to harp on the end result. The 180 yards, 3 touchdowns, like that. When I'm watching your film, the first 2 minutes, I think I saw 2 touchdowns against North Oconee. I'm trying to think what the third one. What were the 3 touchdowns you had in that game?
I had one that I broke loose for like 90 on. I had one where I ran kind of like a corner post and scored on, and then I had one where I ran kind of like a glance route.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the ones that broke for like 90 yards.
Yeah. You had way more 90-yard touchdowns than someone should have in a junior highlight film. I should say that. But I will ask, because you got to see, Landon up close in that game, and then you've obviously now got to see him in a Georgia practice. I guess for starters, what did you think of his game? I know in that game, I think he did a lot more Wildcat stuff and played on the defensive side, but what did you see from him then? And I guess what have you seen from him now at Georgia practices?
I mean, there's obviously a lot of things that relate. So the thing that's different from him at Georgia practice and versus North Oconee was he was running a lot of Wildcat because their starting quarterback got hurt. So I mean, but obviously, like just seeing him at Wild quarterback and him taking one to the house for like 70 yards, like that relates to what you're seeing at Georgia. I mean, he's a player for sure.
I did want to ask about, I know Cartersville has a crazy rich history. I mean, I'm sure whenever anyone brings up Cartersville, you probably hear Trevor Lawrence's name within, 5 seconds of bringing up Cartersville. But I also know Georgia signed Malachi Tolliver a couple cycles ago on the offensive line. Did you all play together, or do you have any familiarity with one another?
So I played with Malachi my freshman year. So when I went up to Georgia this past weekend, me and him talked it up a little bit. I actually told him I was committing early on in practice.
So I was going to ask that, like, has he given you any insights, or what insights has he given you in to Georgia? Not saying that convinced you one way or the other, but just, helping give you some informed information. So
I texted him about Georgia, just like asking about like how it is up there. And he's given me a lot of good insights on it for sure. But it hasn't been a crazy topic for me and him.
All right. Well, Brady, again, congratulations. I know always a big, important decision. Do you know when the next time you'll be back in Athens?
I think this weekend.
Oh, you're coming. So you're just going to make it a regular thing. Should I just expect you in Athens every weekend now at this point?
Probably so. If I ain't got no track meet, I'm there.
Okay. Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming on the show. I know, like I said at the top, man of the hour, everybody wanted to hear from you and learn a little bit more about your game. For those that are watching this or listening to this, we probably have already talked about some of your junior highlight film earlier in the show as well. So it'll be a full Brady episode for us. But thank you again for hopping on. And I will say just one rule with the show. Now that you've come on, anytime that I feel like I need a guest or I'm desperate to have somebody on, you got to come on and join me.
Sounds good.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Brady. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Jordan, I always like to start after we get done with the interview. Just what'd you think of Brady?
I really enjoyed listening to him. There was a couple of moments that I really liked. I think it was when you asked him about like the slant routes and like taking off and leaving DBs in the dust. And he was like, yeah, I think and he goes, I know I can't, like just the confidence of like, yeah, man, I can burn these DBs. I ain't got no shot. The other thing too, when he talked about what he was going to bring to Georgia, you can kind of see he does like a glance before he says it. I don't know if he was making sure a parent wasn't in the room or a teacher or something, but he was like, I'm going to work my ass off. Like, I mean, like but very upfront. In a minute, Ben, while you're talking, I'll pull up some of his highlights and we can talk about them as well. But it's just another situation where I don't know how you can't be excited about this guy. Another pickup for Georgia. Again, this will be the first time I've really watched his highlights, so looking forward to that. But just knowing what you've said and what you guys talked about in that conversation, I mean, I think there's a lot to like with his game.
For sure. And as you pull up his highlights as well, like I'll talk through just some of, what I've seen. And just for the football nerds out there that, he mentioned the glance route, and I referred to it slightly differently. Just like, cut me some slack. All right. When we watch the film here, you'll see it. I'm not sure. I think it's the very first clip that he has on his junior film. They're running a little RPO. It might not be the first one's the screen. So it's the second clip that they're running a little RPO. Him and the quarterback are reading the outside linebacker, and they run this regularly, and they just annihilate defenses running this route. If you're watching this live, you're seeing this is one of his 90-yarders right here. Reed with the quarterback, and then everybody else is going to end up, this corner with him is tracking him there for a second, but he reads it pretty well, ends up beating everybody by about 5 to 10 yards down the field. Like, that is the Brady Marchese highlight tape. Like, he is very rarely being touched. And what I will say is, when he is being touched, he is a menace to bring down. I mean, this is a guy, he's, I made some jokes about the Italian flair. Like, he's kind of a yoked up Italian guy. Like, he sort of has that already. We've mentioned CJ Wiley and Landon Roldan and how they were much more college ready builds than a lot of wide receivers that get recruited. Brady fits right into that category as well. And so, this is someone that I know Georgia is going to be wildly, wildly excited about, because he can do so much at wide receiver. And, just because of the nature of him, being the type of receiver that he is, I think that they feel like they kind of got a steal out of the state of Georgia.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Ben, I have lost you. I don't know if you can still hear me. My AirPods are dead. So I'll fix this in a second and let you keep talking about him. But we got to call him the Italian Stallion, right? Like, we just have to totally lean into it.
No, I think that's exactly the case. And, I think that this is just a big pickup for Georgia. And, with him committed and Vance Spafford committed, and I do think that there's still some recruiting that's going to go on with Vance Spafford. I will also call this out too. Asked Brady after we did the interview on camera just to confirm this too. He's not planning on taking official visits to anywhere else at this point in time. He did mention Arizona State was one program that's done a pretty good job recruiting him. He's got a great relationship with Kenny Dillingham. He might take a trip out to Arizona with his dad just so that they can experience some of that as well. But I'm not expecting him to take any other official visits. I mean, Georgia Tech was a school that I was a little bit worried about for Brady and whether they could get into the mix and be a threat to Georgia, because they were in this recruitment so much earlier than Georgia was. But yeah, I feel pretty strongly about what Georgia has done here, getting him in the class, and, just the flexibility that it now gives you to go after some of the elite of the elite. Also, Gordon Sellers, Brandon Bennett, Calvin Russell, and then some of the in-state guys, Jaden Dunbar, Kayvon Cunciaro. And then, as always, Georgia has some sneaky things up their sleeve at the wide receiver position, where I think they've done some thorough in-the-weeds evals in the state of Georgia with some guys that they haven't even extended any offers to yet. Well, I think that sort of ties a bow on the Brady Marchese conversation. Really appreciate him coming on the show. It will not be the last time that he comes on the show as well. He's a great guest, and someone that I will look forward to having on in the future as well. We got two big segments coming up: arrow pointing up and predict a commit. We'll start with arrow pointing up. Jordan, I'll let you start.
All right, I've got two. The first one, I can't not do this. College basketball. Yeah, I have to pick college basketball right before March Madness, or if you're listening to this, we've seen some of the first four and stuff like that. I did want to point this out, and I want to give Ben an opportunity to shout out some important people in his life. On Wednesday, when we were talking to Blue Cane and Silas Demery Jr., someone asked, hey, what are your early memories of March Madness, NCAA Tournament? Blue said, being in the driveway and you're saying the clock's running down and you take a shot and, you miss. So you got a couple more seconds. You get another shot. And that totally spoke to my childhood. I played a game I used to call 10 seconds. And it's like you're kind of, you're trying to beat the buzzer. But then this is the opportunity I want to give you. Silas brought up being in school and just like begging teachers, like, "Hey, can you put the tournament on? Can we watch?" So I want to give. I'll go first. Any teachers that did that back when you were in school? There's two that I can think of offhand, and this is kind of hilarious. Philip Black and Danny White, Coach Black and Coach White at Jasper Middle School back in the day. I seem to remember them, wheeling the TV in, and Coach Black was a PE coach, and there wasn't a lot of moving around that day during March Madness. So shout out Coach Black and Coach White, looking out for the kids and letting them watch some March Madness.
I mean, yeah, it's only right for kids to get to watch March Madness. Like, it is, to your point, like, I remember being, and I was like the kid in school that would be the most annoying kid trying to get teachers to be able to do. Like, I remember, you bring it up, I hadn't thought about this in forever, but I had third grade teachers, Miss Bartholomew and Miss Blondheim, and this was like real classes too. And it didn't matter to me. I was just so deranged. When you're a kid and you get into March Madness, that's when people become degenerate gamblers, probably for the first time, which, again, we live in the state of Georgia. You're not allowed to do that. But for anybody who lives outside of the state of Georgia that is allowed to do that, this is the best time of year.
The one thing I wanted to say with that, you said you were the most annoying kid. Thank God you grew out of that.
Yeah, right. I'm sure you feel that way. Yeah.
Only other thing I want to do, arrow pointing up, Conan O'Brien. I don't know if you watched the Oscars. I have no idea how time works right now. I don't know how long ago that was. Very funny on there, and he's already said he's going to host the Oscars again next year. Love Conan. I was a little too young for some of his NBC stuff, but he gets screwed over by Jay Leno. I can remember some of the early TBS stuff, which was really funny. I'm a huge Conan fan, and I'm looking forward to the Oscars next year.
Did anyone get robbed?
I was a little surprised that Conclave didn't win more awards, but truthfully, that was one of the only Best Picture movies that I had a chance to see. I feel like I did not do a very good job of watching a bunch of movies, but that Conclave is the only one that immediately comes to mind there.
I watched Conclave after the fact. So the Oscars, sometimes the Oscars is for those of us that aren't as, I don't know, religious.
Cultured.
Yeah, cultured. We're not as cultured as you are. The Oscars almost serves as like a marketing tool for me to be like, oh, that was a really good movie that I should probably watch. So that's what I did with Conclave after the Oscars.
Yeah, apparently Anora cleaned up. I haven't seen that one yet, but I think it won practically all the awards.
All right, arrow pointing up for me. I don't need to get into this one, but white wide receivers, Georgia. I joked with Vance Spafford about this back at the Future 50 a year ago. He didn't have a Georgia offer at the time, and I said, I know this is going to sound weird, but being that I cover Georgia recruiting, I have to be acutely aware of your style of wide receiver, it feels like. So shout out Brady Marchese for, adding to the punchline that's going to be going on for years and years to come. Landon Roldan did us no favors by putting on that 84. Like, they are just playing into the bit as much as possible. I wanted to call this out. I don't know if you saw this. Arrow pointing up. And this is, I'm the most shameless person on planet Earth. The Junkyard Dawgcast. I don't know if you've seen this, Jordan, and I want to credit accordingly. Million Podcasts was doing a bunch of different articles on top podcasts in certain categories. Top 100 SEC football podcasts. Junkyard Dawgcast comes in at number 12 on the list. Jordan, what do you think about that? Us having the 12th best, according to this article, SEC football podcast.
Well, see, you're going to take it as a compliment, but as someone who listens to Kirby Smart every week, why the hell are we not top 10? Well, we gotta grind. We gotta no more flubs on these ad reads. No more of this technology we're having issues with. The little AirPod, issue I just had, inexcusable. We are going for the top 10, but no, super cool to see that. And yeah, hey, fuel to the fire, man. We want top 10 in 2026.
See, I disagree. I think that the AirPod snafu is the reason why we're in the top 12. That's a college football playoff team right there. I mean, we are, I think we should be proud of that. We're just behind Greg McElroy and Cole Kubelik, so we got something to strive for. Maybe a little in Georgia rivalry, the Punt and Paps podcast at number 13. I don't know if this is ranked or if it's just listing them out or whatever. But hey, Aaron Murray, Drew Butler, Peachtree Ridge grad, maybe a little Peachtree Ridge, Georgia podcast rivalry in the Georgia sphere. All jokes aside, respect to all of them and all the podcasters, but also shout out to Million Podcasts for showing some respect to the squad. Gotta love that. So yeah, had to shamelessly plug that. And then you took my other arrow pointing up, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to put you on the spot here. Best time of year, college basketball, Thursday at 12:15 Eastern, I think is the first tip-off time. The next 36 hours are like the best 36 hours in sports, in my opinion. But I'm going to put you on the spot. I know that when is this actually going to go live, this show?
I think we might do it, I don't know, like 11 a.m. Eastern. What do you think? Give people give them something to do. Look, we all know y'all are going to be sitting around waiting on this Georgia game. Don't lie to us. I don't care. You've called out of work. Oh, there must be a buck. Come on. But you guys will have time to watch this before the basketball game. That's my thinking.
Okay, so there are a couple of reasons I wanted to ask that. One, our predictions article will already be up on the site, I would assume. So anything that you're saying here is not going to be giving away anything that you say there. Two, I think that enough of our audience is going to listen to this on their way home from work or potentially even Saturday morning when they're going for a morning run on Saturday, or maybe you're the type of person where you catch up on your podcast on Monday morning on your way to work. So I think there is enough of a scenario where people are listening to this after the fact that I can still make you look bad. So I want you to tell me exactly what happened in the Georgia-Gonzaga game.
All right. Gonzaga got out to an 18-5 lead.
God, the hater. He's a hater already, for the record, folks.
But then Georgia worked their way back. It's a 6-point game at halftime, and it stays within 8 to 10 points for the majority of the game. Georgia got off to a really rough start shooting-wise, and you could kind of tell that the stage got to some of those guys. Few turnovers more than we expected from Silas Emery Jr., but Georgia shoots its way back into this game. Silas Emery Jr. hits a couple of threes. Dakota LaFew, very impressive performance. It is a very competitive final 20 minutes. Ultimately, Graham Ike for Gonzaga hit some big shots down the stretch. Gonzaga gets some big free throws late. They win at 72-64. Obviously, a very disappointing outcome for Georgia, but for the way the game set up and the early minutes, given what Gonzaga's done, everybody holds their head high, and Gonzaga upsets Houston in the round of 32 and gets ready for a big run from there.
All right, so you were wrong. Georgia beat Gonzaga. And the people that are listening to this on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, they already know this. So now Georgia gets into the second round. What happens in the second round now that Georgia's in the second round?
They play pretty well, but Houston is just on a death march to the Final Four. Houston winds up winning that game 81-65, 16-point win for the Cougars. And, I think that Kelvin Sampson owes Mike White a solid because they beat a really good Gonzaga team, and that Houston team is going to have a chance to go win a championship because of it.
Okay, well, SIU Edwardsville actually upset Houston in the first round, so that probably changes the math on that one a little bit. But all right, I am going to give me your Final Four. Who you got in the Final Four? Oh gosh,
I'm going to go Auburn. I'm going to go Texas Tech. I think everybody got on the Florida bandwagon, and I'm officially zagging while everyone else zigs. I'm going to say that Gonzaga. And I'm gonna say Gonzaga, and then I will say Duke,
okay.
And that it is Duke and Auburn in the championship, and the Duke Blue Devils win the championship.
We have the same champion, actually. I have Duke. Oh, goodness gracious. We are really testing my ability to remember my bracket.
It's tough when you're not looking at it, because I said Gonzaga, and then I went, wait a second. So it's a lot harder.
Who's the two in Georgia? I think I have Tennessee out of the Midwest. I've got Florida out of the West, and then I have Michigan State actually out of the South. I'm not as much of an Auburn basketball homer as you obviously are. I actually have them losing in the Sweet 16.
God, you really are on the message board, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I am. I was born in the message board world, but then I have Duke beating Florida in the national championship, which, you mentioned what are your college basketball memories. I'm one of those sorry people that grew up thinking that I was a Duke basketball fan, realizing after the fact that I didn't actually want to be a Duke basketball fan. But I grew up in the Duke basketball world. I mean, I had a 91, 92 championship shirt that was way oversized for me when I was like 5 years old. One of my first real, my feelings were hurt sports memories was Duke losing to Connecticut in the 1998 national championship, where they had, I want to say Paul Pierce, maybe Ray Allen potentially. I might be missing up exactly what their roster was, but that UConn Duke national championship. And then, I've mentioned before, I grew up in a world where one of my best friends is a Florida fan. I went to Billy Donovan summer camps every single year when they were winning their national championships. I remember there was a year Corey Brewer was actually my team counselor at the camp that I was at. So for me, Duke versus Florida, there's sort of a nostalgic national championship there if that ends up being the case, because I went to a lot of Duke and Florida basketball camps through my youth.
I wanted to make sure and mention, because wide receivers was one of your arrows pointing up. Cooper Kupp to the Seahawks. I felt we had to say that. That was killing me. That had to make the cut.
No, you are 100% right to jump in on that one as well. All right, we're gonna wrap up this episode with Predict a Commit. Our graph, for those that watch on YouTube, the graphic is getting a little out of control just with me wanting to have 2 predict a commits every episode. Things have just unraveled faster than I expected. So not going to have that graphic. We're working on getting a better, more aesthetically pleasing for the YouTube graphic that we hope to have next time, but we'll figure that out. Don't worry about the details about the graphic. Wanting to update everybody on who we have picked up to this point. Jordan has taken running back Derek Cooper, linebacker Tyler Atkinson, defensive lineman Carter Lucky, tight end Mark Bowman, safety Jordan Smith, offensive lineman Jared Smith, and then last episode you took edge rusher Kamari Brooks from North Oconee High School. I have offensive lineman Graham Houston, defensive back Zach Fort, always have to call out, check mark next to that one for me, running back Jay Lamar, offensive lineman Desmond Green, defensive back Tyreek Green, offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell, and last episode wide receiver Ryan Mosley. Jordan, I'm going to let you go first this time. Who you got?
That was a dangerous decision.
It was.
This is one I went back and forth on quite a bit, and I will preface this by saying this is not a crystal ball, because I know how people are going to be when they see it. But
I think I know what you're about to do here.
All right, let's see. Let's get this bad boy pulled up on the other screen.
Yeah, you did it. I didn't think you were going to do it.
Let's see here. Hold tight, everybody.
And for everyone that's still waiting because of Jordan's suspense, I was considering doing this. I was not going to, but I'm glad you did. I'm glad you're doing this.
I appreciate that, and I want to thank you for backing me up here. But we're doing it. Jared Curtis is going to be my predicted commit. Again, it's a situation where we don't know this for sure. I would not at all be surprised if Oregon wound up winning out here, but just all we've heard, and again, what I think is one of the things that's really striking from the talk around his recruitment, especially of late, is how much staying close to home matters. And I think that, as much as people really put a lot of stock in the fact that, Oregon is one of these contenders, and we know the amount of money that Oregon's going to put up. I think the connections at Georgia, I think how comfortable he and his family are at Georgia, I think it wins out. And I'm picking Jared Curtis, knowing full well I'm going to hear about it if he is an Oregon Duck. But I had to do it. I see the path to him recommitting to Georgia. So Jared Curtis is my predicted commit.
Bold, but I respect the hell out of the pick. I did consider doing this just because I knew we were going to be talking about Jared Curtis and the quarterback position a lot. And I think that there is some credibility to having the quarterback. Because, like, here's the reality. If Jared Curtis until Jared Curtis commits, I no longer am going to be able to pick a quarterback for a predicted commit, because if I just can't feel comfortable one way versus the other at any quarterback other than Jared Curtis right now. So you kind of tied my hands behind my back now, where it's like I now, like Georgia and Oregon, have to sit here and wait for Jared Curtis to make his decision to see where I might pivot to. But if he ends up choosing Georgia, I'm not going to have a quarterback on my predicted commit list for the entire cycle, and I think that will reflect well on your list when it's all said and done. So I like that pick. It is risky because, like you said, there's a world where 3 days from now he's committed to Oregon, and then whatever. But that's why we love this show, and that's why we love the courage that you bring to this show, Jordan. Because I think that was a good pick, and I also think now is the right time to make that pick.
Sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit.
That's right. I'm going to go with what I consider a much safer pick than this. And it's actually at a position group that I've already taken a couple of guys at, but I'm trying to bolster up that offensive line up front. I've already taken Graham Houston, which is a pick that I feel very strongly about when it comes to Georgia and the interior offensive line. I took a little bit of a risk with Jackson Cantwell because he is a big-time recruitment that will get competitive with Oregon and Missouri and Miami and a few others. And so I don't necessarily feel as convicted in that pick as I do some other ones. So I'm going to bolster up the offensive line with an elite talent that I think Georgia should feel really good about right now, and there's a lot of reasons for it. And that is Ekene Ugboko from South Garner High School in North Carolina. That is the younger brother of Nnamdi Ugboko. And Jordan, you did something really savvy, I think, earlier in the cycle or in a previous episode by taking Carter Lucky, the younger brother of Lawson Lucky. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to take those family ties. This is someone that is he's a big body. This is a big dude. I remember even going, and this might be, if you're for those watching on YouTube, Jordan's scrolling through the photos. If you keep going, Jordan, there might be some toward the end with him and Nnamdi standing next to each other when I went to one of their South Garner games. I hope that's the case so that I'm not, getting people possibly being able to see it when that's not the case. But I found it very interesting because I'm there to see a guy that's signing to be Georgia's defensive lineman, and his brother just dwarfs him. I mean, I remember Nnamdi was even laughing about it, but when we went to go take the photo, we were standing on sort of a weird slanted hill where Nnamdi wanted to be on the higher side of the hill. So, yep, you're seeing the photo right here. Nnamdi wanted to be on the higher side of the hill so that he looked a little bit taller compared to Ekene, because he knew how it might look, him standing next to a then sophomore younger brother. But that's just a testament to what Ekene brings as a prospect. I mean, he fits that 6'6", pushing 300 pounds that Georgia really likes. Could probably play tackle, could probably play guard. I think that Georgia wanted to be patient with his development to see where it's at. But this is a highly ranked guy that Georgia just has the inside track on because of his older brother's recruitment. And so that's someone that I do think Georgia is going to end up signing when it's all said and done.
I like that pick a lot. Again, it's one of those where, especially as we go through this, I don't know, Ben, if you found this. It's like when we started the predict a commit segment, you kind of like, oh, this feels like a pretty obvious one. And we're getting to the point as we pick guys, you kind of have to work a little harder to find ones that, I don't know if you'd necessarily say are obvious, but like, okay, I really like the chances here. Hard not to think that with Ekene. And again, it won't be easy. A lot of high-profile teams are recruiting him. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind, too. I think it's easy as a fan to be like, oh, they're recruiting him because of his brother. Like, wow, really working hard there, But these are him, Carter, Lucky. I mean, these are super talented guys. I think Georgia's making the most of those already established relationships. And I'm with you. I like Georgia's chances with this one.
Definitely. But yeah, I am with you as well. It's becoming more and more challenging to to pick on a weekly basis who we think it's going to be, or who we think are worthy predicted commits. And as we're seeing with Brady Marchese, like there are some guys that we don't have on our list that might sneak in there and be able to do it. And so, we'll see. Maybe we'll do 2 next time. Maybe I'll get back on my to an episode flair and just see what we do as well. But I like both of those picks, Jared and Ekene. There's a legitimate world where Boko is blocking for Curtis for years and years to come.
I think a lot of Georgia fans would be excited for it to play out that way.
Well, thank you again, Jordan, obviously, for helping out with this while you were on the road. I know that the timing and everything is not ideal for you, so I really appreciate you. I appreciate Brady Marchese for coming on and joining as a guest. Congratulations to him again and as well for joining the class. I will be on vacation next week, which I know you love the idea of spring practice happening and maybe Georgia making a Sweet 16 run and me being on vacation. So you're welcome for that. But that probably also means we're not going to have a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show episode next week. But I would expect we are going to start having them probably more regularly as we get into mid-April, just because Georgia coaches are going to be out on the road. And I think we're going to start seeing commitments on a much more regular basis.
So do you think Jared Curtis is going to announce his decision when you board the flight? What's the timeline you think to just totally ruin this vacation you've got?
I think the last time actually that I felt like I was away during a time where this was a risk. I was on my buddy's bachelor party in Austin, Texas for the Florida-Texas game last November, and I'm on the escalator down to get my bags when I got a text from CJ Wiley's dad saying, hey, we're about to have some news here. And I think within 45 seconds, everybody had the news tweeted out there. And as you know, anybody who knows how this world works on our side, like I went into immediate frantic mode. But no, this time I'm going off, Jordan. So if Jared Curtis commits, I'm gonna try and get you guys as much intel as I can beforehand. But if it happens while I'm gone, you're welcome to the Georgia fan base for Jared Curtis being committed and me being away for it.
I like our chances over at Dogs 24/7. We'll man the fort if you're off the grid for a bit.
Well, thanks again. As always, please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, to Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We really appreciate everyone that listens wherever it is that you listen to the Junkyard Dawgcast and the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show. Until next time, I am your host, Ben Wolk, for Jordan.